Welcome to this, the first ever episode of Networking on Nimbus III. Hi there, I'm your host, Michael, aka the TrekLad, and I'm excited to bring you this brand new podcast that will explore all things Star Trek. A big thank you to you for joining this podcast. It's the first of its kind, and it was very quick in coming together. It's something that I only decided to do a few days ago, but I'm pleased that I've got it up and running, and I'm very excited to bring you positive Star Trek with either myself or guests, a very exciting array of guests that we've got coming over the next few weeks and months. I hope that you're well. I hope that you're staying well through this. Obviously, everything that's going on right now, we are in obviously it's a word that everybody likes to use, but unprecedented. We are in unprecedented times, but I hope that you are okay, I hope your family are okay, and I hope that you're staying well and safe during this difficult time. Hopefully Star Trek is something that you have been able to use as a healthy escape, something that's given you some joy during these difficult times. I know personally that it has done that for me. So segueing into the reason why this podcast exists and the reason why the TrekLad itself exists is simply because I have been a long-time fan of Star Trek. I've been a fan of Star Trek since, pretty much since I could talk and watch things. So it's been a while. My dad would say mental age. I've been a fan for about 6 weeks, but we'll just ignore him. In terms of my story and how I came to like Star Trek, it was something that I'm sure this is something that a lot of you have experienced as well. It came from my dad and my granddad, so I grew up with them both being very big fans of Star Trek. I actually fondly remember going to my grandparents, and it was always on, Sunday, BBC Two. You would have TOS, you'd have the original Star Trek series, and my grandma would just plonk me down in front of the TV and just say, "Shut up." He's a Scotsman as well, so it's like, "Shut up, boy." And it's a terrible Scottish accent. And he'd just stick me down in front of the TV and just say, "Watch this," and it's the best thing you ever watch. And I was inclined to agree. I would say that it was my dad that got me into Star Trek: The Next Generation, and that's really where the kind of fandom took off. Although I would say that it was around about the same time Deep Space Nine was coming into its own. So I fondly remember the videotape for The Way of the Warrior, which was my gateway into Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So it started really early, at a really early age. I also remember driving my parents mad, going downstairs at 4 o'clock in the morning and putting on the VHS tape of The Search for Spock. And I would do that almost every single morning and just drive them mad. I remember once my dad coming downstairs and saying, "Michael, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, wait until 5 and then we'll watch it together." So I really fond memories of Star Trek from my childhood, and it's followed me through my entire life, into my adult life. I'm 30 years old now, 30 years young, and I've been, my fandom has changed. I've obviously had some moments where I've kind of dipped in and out over the years, but I've been a constant subscriber to the franchise, and I've loved pretty much everything that has been put out by the people that have made Star Trek. I have opinions on the new incarnation of Star Trek. It's not something that I really will probably go into in too much detail, simply because the reason why I am doing this and the reason why this all kind of exists, TrekLad and networking on Nimbus III, ties into what we're currently going through at the moment. And it's simply, Star Trek to me is, and it's something that Gary from Trekkerprise puts really, really well. It's a warm blanket. It is a comfort thing. Star Trek to me is a fantastic distraction from everything that's going on in this world. Not to say that I completely shut myself off from what's going on, but we need distractions. We need things to enjoy with our lives, and Star Trek is that for me. So, really, I mean, I want to talk about the things in the fandom that I enjoy. I like this about Star Trek. I like that about Star Trek. I don't really see any point in talking about the aspects of Star Trek that I don't like. I mean, if I can do it constructively and if I can do it without attacking anybody and making anybody feel upset or disrespected, that's what I'll do. So that's basically my mission statement and my promise, is that Star Trek for me is something that I always discuss in a positive light. If there's a way I can debate it in a positive way that's not going to upset anybody, I will do that. So, that's pretty much me. That's the TrekLad right now. In terms of who I am and the person behind TrekLad, as I said, Michael, I'm 30 years old. I live just outside London, which obviously right now I'm existing entirely inside my house, which is, it's been fun, but we're all doing it at the moment. But I live in a small town in Buckinghamshire, near London. So that's me. Obviously, if the world was normal, I'd be looking forward to going to Destination Star Trek later on in the year. It remains to be seen if that's going to happen or not. But if it, even when the world does kind of reopen and we can go back to a state of normality eventually, it'd be an absolute pleasure to meet up with some of you, meet up with you in person at a Destination Star Trek or another similar convention. So, like I said, this episode is simply just an intro for me to introduce myself and my story. But what I have done is I have asked some of the lovely people on Twitter to ask me some questions. So I have something to talk about, some material to get out. So I'm going to go through some of these now. We're going to see what the guys from Twitter have for me. We've got a few questions here. So the first one is from Steve Brewer at SteveJB1701. And he asks, in your opinion, what is the best two-parter anywhere in Star Trek? That's a really good question, Steve. There are a lot that immediately spring to mind. There are a lot that don't immediately spring to mind, I'm sure. I love two-parters. I love anything that you can kind of mesh together and have that kind of feature-length experience. My favourite part of the Star Trek franchise is the movies. So if I can smush 2 episodes together and have a longer experience, it's always going to be a win for me. In terms of the best two-parter, there are a few. Obviously, the best of both worlds is always going to be the one that kind of comes up top. The first thing that I think of. But there's other episodes. There is the Unification two-parter. There is the Worf Redemption storyline, the Klingon Civil War storyline. I can't remember the episode name. It's not coming to me. There's also I really like Time's Arrow. I know that's not an episode that a lot of people talk about, but I really like that one. I'm not so keen on Descent, but it's still a decent episode. Chain of Command is a huge favourite two-parter for me and for a lot of people as well. But these are just TNG. Obviously, Deep Space Nine. We've got Way of the Warrior, like I mentioned. We've got the Search. No, not Search. That was a one-off episode. No, Search is a two-parter episode. So Search parts 1 and 2. We've also got Past Tense 1 and 2. Fantastic two-parter. I watched that the other day, actually. What else have we got? Voyager, we've got feature-length episodes there. We've got Unimatrix Zero. We've got Equinox, which is fantastic. I love Equinox. The original series, we've got The Menagerie, which is a fantastic two-parter. Obviously reuses some aspects from The Cage, which I love, giving Pike that iconic wheelchair identification, which haunted my dreams when I was a kid. Enterprise, obviously we've got a lot of stuff from season 4, but they were mainly kind of like 3-parters in some instances. I love the whole season 3 arc, but that's not really a 2-parter, is it? I would say that really my favourite 2-parter has to be The Best of Both Worlds. It's just perfect. Part 1 is just marginally better than part 2, but it's because it creates this problem that just left you in awe, and how on earth are they going to solve this problem? But part 2 is still absolutely fantastic and definitely worthy. And a lot of people would argue that Family, the episode afterwards in season 4, basically makes it a trilogy, and I completely subscribe to that theory too. But if you're looking at pure episode titles, Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2, I think is the best two-parter, at least in my opinion anyway. I know I've missed a whole load out, but if you have any that spring into mind right now and you'd like to drop them, let me know either on Twitter or on Instagram, wherever you like to go for your social. Let me know what your favourite two-parter is. But thank you very much for that question, Steve. Great question. Next question is from my friend Alexander at Mr_Picard. Alexander is I believe he is the runner of the Sir Patrick Stewart News publication. Is a fantastic Twitter friend that I've known. I've made quite recently. Alexander is awesome, has a very particular sense of humour, and loves Jean-Luc Picard. But who doesn't love Jean-Luc Picard? Alexander's question is, what's your favourite Jean-Luc outfit? And it can't be a uniform. Now, this one is interesting because Jean-Luc is often, at least in the movies, jumping out of an outfit. I know he does in the TV show a few times as well. A few are springing to mind. The outfit that he wears in Captain's Holiday when he goes on the archaeological expedition with Vash. I love his Robin Hood outfit. From Cupid. I'm sure you probably do, Alexander, as well. For me, the best... I'm probably going to cheat here because I actually think it is part of his uniform. But in First Contact, and I'm sure you like this, Alexander, as well, because it's basically a striptease, is when he goes from the full uniform... Wait, he actually goes from full uniform to civilian wear when he beams down to the missile complex. Then he beams back up and he kind of wears this waistcoat ensemble that looks really, really good. And I know that Cisco stole the look on a couple of occasions as well. It's not actually that one, because as the film progresses, he kind of becomes more and more de-uniformed. I don't know if de-uniformed is the word to use, but he kind of loses his clothes. Again, Alexander, control yourself here. But it's the look that he has right at the end. He's basically stripped down to the vest. He's got that kind of action hero look. He literally looks like John McClane in space. And it's a badass look, and it's a look that forms part of an iconic scene. If I was to put a second favourite, I do like what he wears in Insurrection. I think it the leather coat kind of gives him a bit of a badass look. But for me, it's what he wore at the end of Star Trek First Contact. I know that's cheating, Alexander. Please be easy on me. But hopefully that answers your question. Thank you very much for that question. Next question comes from Toss a Mask to Your Painter. Interesting name, at Zeodrux. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. And your question is a Picard/Discovery crossover. Should it happen, and if so, how? Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think what Star Trek has taught us over the years is that anything can happen. Absolutely anything. Time travel allows for so many possibilities. So yeah, I don't think it's a case of should it happen. I think should it happen? I don't know. It's completely up to the creators. But could it happen? Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I was actually expecting from Picard was for there to be some sort of casually slipped in mention of the events of Discovery or a certain character. I joked with a friend of mine that we'd probably see a Michael Burnham statue outside Starfleet Command. And to be honest, I really thought that was a decent... I thought that was a good guess. I mean, I know that obviously she was kind of wiped from the annals of history, but... There's a lot of time that happened between the events of Discovery and the events of the show that we caught up with in Picard. So yeah, I was kind of just a little bit disappointed that we didn't see Statue Burnham outside Starfleet Command or Starfleet Headquarters. But in terms of if the crossover could happen and how, I mean... One of the things I think that future seasons of Picard could cover would be the attitude that leads to the kind of dissolution of the United Federation of Planets. As we've seen in the Discovery Season 3 trailer, the United Federation of Planets is just a couple of planets now. The big Federation is no more. Something went terribly, terribly wrong. I'm sure it's probably some sort of political standpoint that may have caused division, and hopefully that's something that Burnham and the crew of the Discovery can help resolve. But I think that you could have references to Discovery and Discovery's crew made in subsequent seasons of Picard. I don't know if that's something that they're going to tackle. If they don't cover that, then there's always the time aspect. I think in universe, the Nexus would form a really great way to bring two historical aspects of Star Trek together again, given the fact that Discovery is so far in the future. And it would be great to see the Nexus again, because I think, I don't have the information to hand, but I think it's every 78 years that Nexus passes through our part of space. So, again, it's a leap into the future, but it's something that Picard could potentially address. Personally, I would quite like to see it. I mean, a lot of the look and feel of the shows, they're very, very similar from a production standpoint. And I know that was done commercially to save a bit of money, but, you've got two shows that are running right now. They're very popular with Star Trek fans. I think that it would be a great idea to do it. I'm all for it happening. I'm just not entirely sure on how it happens, but I'd be intrigued to know what you think, and let me know again on the social media platform that you use how you think it should look. Next question is from ZX Jeff Owen at NCC_17 Formula One. That's an interesting handle. That kind of meshes two cool things together. And Jeff's question is, what was your introduction to Star Trek? And do you like any TV or movie sci-fi other than Star Trek? So I feel like I've kind of answered my introduction to Star Trek at the beginning of this. Obviously, it came from hanging around with my dad and my granddad. One thing that I didn't mention is when I was 4, my parents took me to a Star Trek museum in London. I don't know if you remember this, or if anybody remembers the Star Trek museum. I don't know where it was. I can't remember exactly where in London it was. I think it was to coincide with the finale of The Next Generation and the launch of Generations, the movie. So it was about 1994, maybe 1995. And I went, and I was a brat when I was 4. I'm still a brat now, really. But I went there. They took me there, and I saw some incredible things, and things that I always remember. Like you saw the original Q costume from Encounter at Farpoint, and some awesome Klingon props and things like that. They're things that I think are still around, especially when you go to the museum element of Destination Star Trek. But to see that as a 4-year-old kid, you're getting up and close with these awesome characters and this great stuff, and I remember being blown away. But anyway, the reason I'm talking about this is because I really wanted to buy the action figure of Dr. Tolian Soren, and my parents had spent all of their money on the train journey, and they just bought me a lovely lunch, as good as a 4-year-old kid can have. I can't remember what it was. And I was like, I really want this action figure, please buy it for me. And they said no, and I threw a tantrum, and I think I threw such a wobbly they had to kind of drag me out. But there you go, a brat. But that was a different introduction to Star Trek. I did one day buy that Tolian Soren action figure, and it now proudly sits in my collection. So thanks for that, Mum and Dad. But in terms of any TV or movie or any movies sci-fi other than Trek, I have a very diverse taste in TVs and movies. My second love is film. I'm a part-time rubbish film critic. I love watching movies of all genres. Doesn't matter what it is. I'll watch it. As long as it's good, of course. I do like TV shows. I'm just more of a movie fan, so hence my love of the Star Trek movies. TV shows, I remember my dad also introduced me to the classic Battlestar Galactica show, and then subsequently, when I was a little bit older, he introduced me to the Reimagined show. And I would say that the Reimagined Battlestar Galactica is up there as one of my favourite non-Trek shows. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. So well produced, and I do think that it did inspire the future Star Trek that we are getting now. Definitely a product of its time, but so well written. Ronald D. Moore is one of the great creatives of the modern Star Trek, or the Star Trek from TNG era anyway. I love that show so much. Other shows I love X-Files. I don't watch a lot of it. I haven't watched a lot of it, but I like Stargate. I've honestly probably watched about 20 episodes, though. It's the film that I love. I really love the film Stargate. It's got a fantastic soundtrack. Independence Day, on the theme of awesome soundtracks. I love that and Roland Emmerich movies. Honestly, I could talk about this forever. But the sci-fi shows that really kind of get me excited. I mean, I like Rick and Morty. I think everybody does. I'm not one of those fans, though, that thinks that I'm super smart because I like it. If there's any kind of original sci-fi that's out there, I'll try and give it a go. I know that there's quite a lot of stuff that isn't so good, but I'm such a sci-fi fan. I can't help but try anything that comes across. So if you have any TV or sci-fi movie recommendations, please let me know. If I was to say a favourite TV show that isn't sci-fi, I'll probably get laughed at for this, but I'm currently watching my way through all of Hell's Kitchen US. I love Gordon Ramsay. I just love how he shouts and swears, and it's a little bit of me. When I'm not getting my own way, as the Tully and Soren action figure demonstrated. So Hell's Kitchen is a non-sci-fi favourite. Thanks for that question, Jeff, and hopefully speak to you soon when you join us on the show. Next question is from Ian Galactic Dave Whittington. That's an awesome name, at Ian G. Whittington. What is it that makes Star Trek so rewatchable? He thinks that it survived for so long because most of us are on our 20th rewatch. What makes Star Trek so rewatchable? I think it ties into the beginning of this podcast where I said that it's a warm blanket, to quote Gary from Trekkerprise. It is the show that brings back wonderful memories of when we were young and maybe when the world wasn't so complicated. And it's a wonderful comfort piece of entertainment. We can go and we can pick it up and we can rewatch it at any point, particularly with some of the older Star Trek that had the more episodic format. The one thing that I love is I have lots of guilty pleasures, by the way. I mean, go figure, the name of the podcast is it features Nimbus III. But I love the first season of Star Trek, the Next Generation. I love season 1. There's something about it. It has a very kind of quaint quality about it compared to what we got. And there's also this kind of sheen of 80s. And this kind of, they were attempting really hard to make sure that there was a connective tissue between the Star Trek that we were getting and the Star Trek that we had gotten in the past with the classic TOS series. So you had the same kind of writers, you had the same kind of setup production style. In some scenes you would even have like the same kind of 60s lighting on the eyes and things like that. And it just reminds me of being a kid sat there watching classic Star Trek with my granddad and watching VHS tapes of TNG with my dad. So it just takes me back. It makes me feel good, and that's one of the reasons for me that it's so rewatchable. But there are other reasons as well. Star Trek is just this massive universe where there's so much lore and there's so many great characters. All you need to do is look on Twitter. There's essentially a fan Twitter account for every single character in Star Trek. I'm sure of it. So there's a lot of we connect with the characters in the show. We care about what they're doing. We care about who they're interacting with and what their adventures are or misadventures. And it just makes you want to come back, even if you've seen it 20 times. You just want to go back. You want to enjoy it time and time again. So there are a number of reasons that make Star Trek so rewatchable. I'm looking forward to being a fan, long into my, hopefully, when I become a grandfather of my own and I can put my grandkids in front of the then it'll be then classic Discovery and say, watch this was when Star Trek was good. And and introduce a whole new generation of fans in. So I think it's kind of cyclical, and there's a cycle to it for sure. Thanks for your question, Ian, and like Jeff, I'm looking forward to having a more in-depth conversation with you in the future. Final question comes from Nak McFeagle. At Nook McFeagle. I hope I've got that right. He sent me 2 questions, and I'm going to do my best with the first one. How the F do the free shells work? This is a really hard fucking question. I don't know. You know what? When I first watched Demolition Man, I was kind of more focused on Sylvester Stallone being awesome and jumping out of a helicopter, and Pizza Hut. Demolition Man got me into Pizza Hut. If you're in America, you might know. You might go. You might be asking. What is he talking about? It's Taco Bell. Well, they actually in the UK they released Demolition Man with references to Pizza Hut instead of Taco Bell. So different product placement across the world. So I was more focused on that rather than the free seashells. But I love that joke so much. It's so good, isn't it? And it kind of raises a load of questions of, he has not wiped. How is he walking so well? And, no one answers his question as well. Just let him know, what technology are you using for this hygiene in the future? I do remember, and I'm sure you may have experienced this as well, some absolutely talented genius did a fully 3D virtual tour of the Enterprise D. I think it's still about, if I can find it, I'll share it on Twitter. But if you go into the bathroom, which is just off the bridge, to the right of the bridge, just by the meeting room, the observation deck. The toilet there, actually, the flushing mechanism is the free seashells, which just made me laugh for way longer than it probably should have. But that's a really good joke, and I love Demolition Man. I've got all the time in the world for that movie, even if the Pizza Hut product placement is probably responsible for me being the shape I am now. But thank you for that first question. He does go on to ask a second question, and I think this is more for lore, so this is quite interesting. In Star Trek 1, Voyager was sent back to Earth to complete its mission. It was rebuilt/repaired by a planet populated by machines and then sent off back to Earth. Was that a preliminary stage for the Borg? Now we're talking. I love speculating on Star Trek and some of these events, and I think this is something that has been discussed by a lot of people over years. But the origins of V'Ger, a lot of people have tried to link it in as being kind of proto Borg. Yeah, and I don't know because obviously we'll probably never know unless future Star Trek decides to expand on it. I don't know if any books do, but in my mind, the alien, the machine civilization that encountered Voyager, and then reprogrammed it and repaired it and sent it back and helped it evolve. It doesn't seem to me like there was a lot of aggression behind their motives. It kind of seemed to me just like they gave this probe new life and they gave it a mind of its own, and then as it was voyaging through space, and going back to Earth, it was purely on a mission of discovery. It was on a mission of learning more about itself. And that seems to be quite a positive intention. It seems to be a good intention, even if it was causing all the devastation that it did. But that was mainly just self-defense. I know that when it encountered Epsilon and disintegrated that station, I don't know if they had fired anything. It was all off screen. I know that they had gone to red alert. Maybe that had been perceived as being threatening by V'Ger. But it's really interesting. I personally don't link the two. However, when Ilea and Deckard merge at the end, we don't know what they become. We don't know where they end up. Could it be that they created this new life form that then became hostile and then decided that they wanted to add, new species and new technology to themselves? So my mind is no. However, if they were to expand on it and basically say, look, Vita did become the Borg, the big bad, I'd accept it. But I do, the one thing that I found kind of intriguing about Discovery Season 2 was the introduction of control. That seemed far more kind of proto kind of Borg to me, as did the AI civilization in Picard as well. So I think there is still, the universe is a big place. There are plenty of bad AI out there that might have formed the basis of the Borg. So in a long roundabout way, I don't think so. But if you do, then I'd be very interested to know. And that's about it. That's all the questions for this time, for this first episode anyway. Thank you so much for listening to this first episode of Networking on Nimbus 3. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you can join for future episodes. Please subscribe. Please consider subscribing on the platform that you're listening to this on, and give me a follow on Twitter and Instagram at TrekLad. For all things positive about the Star Trek universe. Just one more thing before I go. Like I said at the beginning, if you are struggling with anything right now and isolation is getting too much, or if you're worried about anything and you want someone to talk to feel a little bit better, and you maybe want that escapism, you want to talk Star Trek, or you want to talk anything, my DMs are always open, and I truly mean that. The reason why I've rejoined the Twitter Star Trek community, and the reason why I'm doing all this, is because I want to connect with good people, and I want to share my love of the franchise in a positive, respectful way, and I want to do that with positive, respectful people. And I truly mean when I say I'm here to have a good time, to help support the community, to make friends along the way. That's super important to me. And if I can help in any way, with anybody, with anything, I would love to. So if you are that person and you're struggling with anything, please drop me a DM or however you'd like to communicate. I'll be more than happy to help you and have a conversation. That's pretty much it. Like I said, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, get involved. I hope you're enjoying this podcast and the podcast series. My next guest is, I'm going to have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Gary from Trekker Prize. We're going to talk all things Star Trek 5. So I hope you are looking forward to that. Please join me next time. Take care of yourself, and until the next time, live long and prosper.